Hello friends, today we are going to discuss about hereditary influences on development. The objectives of this module are to recognize the influence of heredity on child development, to understand how genes get expressed, and to identify the types of the abnormalities caused due to genetic factors. Nature versus nurture. A significant issue in the developmental psychology is the relationship between the innateness of an attribute, whether it is part of our nature, and the environmental effects on the attribute, whether it is influenced by our environment or nurture. This is often referred to as nature versus nurture debate or nativism versus empiricism. A nativist or nurture account of development would agree that the process in question are innate and influenced by an organism's genes. Natural human behavior is seen as the result of already present biological factors such as genetic code. An empiricist, nurture, perspective would argue that these processes are acquired through interaction with the environment. Nurtured human behavior is seen as the result of environmental interaction which can provoke changes in brain structure and chemistry. For example, situations of extreme stress can cause problems like depression. The nature versus nurture debate seeks to understand how our personalities and traits are produced by our genetic makeup and biological factors and how they are shaped by our environment, including our parents, peer, culture. For instance, why do biological children sometimes act like their parents? Is it because of genetic similarity or the result of the early childhood environment and what children learn from their parents? Meaning of heredity. Heredity is the sum of total of the traits potentially present in the fertilized ovum. All the qualities that a child inherited from the parent is called heredity. After knowing the meaning, one must know about the mechanism of heredity. How is child biologically born? Life starts as a single cell. Conception time. The union of male and female germ cells causes fertilization of the ovum. The fertilized egg is known as zygote. Each chromosome contains about 40 to 100 genes. The genes are responsible for the development of particular traits. In the words of Peterson, heredity may be defined as what gets from his ancestral stock through his parents. Douglas and Holland says, heredity consists of all the structures, physical characteristics, functions or capacities derived from parents and other ancestors. F. L. Rook considers the heredity as the totality of biologically transmitted factors that influence the structure of the body. At its very beginning, the development of a child starts when the male reproductive cell or sperm penetrates the protective outer membrane of the female reproductive cell or ovum. The sperm and the ovum each contains chromosomes that act as a blueprint for human life. The genes contained in these chromosomes are made up of a chemical structure known as DNA or deoxyribonucleic acid that contains the genetic code or instructions that make up all life. Except for the sperm and ova, all cells in the body contains 46 chromosomes. The sperm and the ova each contain only 23 chromosomes. This ensures that when the two cells meet, the resulting new organism has correct 46 chromosomes. There are certain laws under heredity by which the behavior and the attitude of an individual are formed. Let's have a look at them. Laws of heredity, a brief description. There are a total of 3 laws that define the heredity and the implications. Laws of similarity. In this law, the offsprings are an exact replica of their parents. Children of intelligent parents are born intelligent, while child of a dull parent will be born dull. In this case, the offspring products are hugely similar to their previous generations. Laws of variations. Under this law, the offsprings are genetically varied from their parents. It has no guarantee that all the advancements of the parents are being transferred into their children. This all depends upon the gene transfer from parents to their children. Law of regressions. It is often observed that children are the exact opposite of their parents' nature and behavior. This is categorized under the law of regression. This factor again is based on the genetic transfer from parents to their offsprings. The genes of commonality do not lapse and have a chance of being transferred in future generations. There are certain principles that are derived from the influence of heredity. Principles of heredity. Law of continuity of germ plasms. This principle indicates that a temporary deformity in the living being does not affect the upcoming generation. This experiment was performed on 25 generations of mouse where their tail was cut, but next time the next generation was born with a tail. This showed that germ cells are not impacted by the environment, while somatic cells are transferred to the next generation. The germ cells are not transferred. Theory of Mendel. Johann Gregor Mendel said that nature always maintains a balance. If a certain feature is not visible in the offspring of a couple, that does not mean it is lost. Those genes are still alive and may show their impact on future generations. Theory of Galton's biometric. Galton suggested that not all specifications of an individual are received from the parents to an individual, but also many times they are being inherited by their ancestors. This theory included qualities being transferred from grandfather or grandmother. Theory of Darwin. Darwin suggests that often the changes on the future generation is because of the changes that are being observed in the environment and that impacts an individual and his personality. Often, these picked up habits are transferred to the coming generation. Genetic influences. So, how exactly do the genetic instruction passed down from both parents influence how a child develops and the traits they will have? In order to fully understand this, it is important to first distinguish between a child's genetic inheritance and the actual expression of those genes. All living things consist of cells. Each cell contains chromosomes, structures within cells that carry genes. Genes are essentially a string of chemicals that provide the detailed set of instructions for the biological makeup of life. Each species has a unique set of instructions. About 25,000 genes go into the blueprint for the human life. A genotype refers to all of the genes that a person has inherited. A phenotype is how these genes are actually expressed. The phenotype can include physical traits such as height and color or the eyes, as well as non-physical traits such as shyness and extroversion. While the genotype may represent a blueprint for how children grow up, the way that these building blocks are put together determines how these genes will be expressed. Think of it as a bit like building a house. The same blueprint can result in a range of different homes that look quite similar but have important differences based on the material and color choices used during construction. At the time of conception, the ovum of the mother and the sperm cell of the father unite to form new cell. The small particles in the nucleus of the cell are called chromosomes. The chromosomes exist in pairs. The human cell has 46 chromosomes arranged in 23 pairs. One member from each pair comes from the mother and the other one from the father. Chromosomes store and transmit genetic information. The genes, which are the actual trait carriers, are found in very large number in each chromosome. The fertilized zygote brings together various combinations of chromosomes. In this way, different genes are transferred from each child of the same set of parents. Due to this reason, each child bears greater similarity to his or her blood relatives than to anyone else. At the same time, there are also many differences among blood relatives. Genotype and phenotypes. Genetic transformation is a complex process. Most characteristics that we observe in human beings are combination of a large number of genes. Innumerable permutations and combinations of genes are responsible for the large differences in physical and psychological characteristics. Only identical or monozygotic twins have exactly the same set of chromosomes and genes as they are formed by duplication of a single zygote. Most twins are fraternal or dizygotic, who develop from two separate zygotes. These fraternal twins may resemble each other like brother and sister, but they will also be different from one another in many ways. Differences between monozygotic and dizygotic twins. Genes can be dominant or recessive. It is a known fact that there is more color blindness or lack of sensitivity to certain colors among males than females. A grandmother and mother can transmit this condition to the male child without being color blind themselves. This is because in the male this disorder is dominant, whereas in female it is recessive. The genes form pairs. If both genes in a pair are dominant, the individual will display the specific trait, for example, color blindness. If one gene is dominant and the other is recessive, the dominant will prevail. The recessive gene will be passed on and may show up in the later generation. The dominant gene, therefore, is the one responsible for a particular trait to show up in a person. The characteristics which show up and are displayed, example eye color, are called phenotypes. The recessive gene does not show up as a trait unless paired with another gene just like it. The characteristics that are carried genetically as recessive gene but are not displayed are called genotypes. Genotype therefore refers to the actual genetic material or a person's genetic heritage, while phenotype refers to individuals' physical and behavioral characteristics which are determined by both genetic and environmental factors. Influence of gene on child development. In order to understand child development, it is important to look at the biological influences that help shape child development. How experiences interact with genetic and some of the genetic disorders that can have an impact on the child's psychology and development. As we all know, genes from our parents influence everything from height, weight, eye color and other physical characteristics to behavioral patterns in achievement, intelligence and motivation. A child's biology can have major implications on their development. So the more we as parents and teachers can understand the science behind our children's bodies and minds, the better we are able to nurture them to their full potential and healthiest, happiest selves. Many scholars have put considerable time and effort into researching the interplay of genes and childhood development, largely to unravel the misconception that genes are set in stone at birth like as we once thought. As mentioned, genes and our environment interact to form the whole picture of every child, and certain genes like CHRM2, which was pinpointed by researchers at Virginia Commonwealth University, predict a child's resilience to early life traumas and parental neglect. Findings like these and their implications for education have helped develop the new field of educational genomics, which could enable to academics to create curriculum tailored to a student's DNA profile. Gene expression. Whether or not a gene is expressed depends on two different things: the interaction of the gene with other gene and the continual interaction between the genotype and the environment. Genetic interactions. Genes can sometimes contain conflicting information, and in most cases one gene will win the battle for dominance. Some genes act in an additive way. For example, if a child has one tall parent and one short parent, the child may end up splitting the difference by being of an average height. In other cases, some genes follow a dominant recessive pattern. Eye color is one example of dominant recessive genes at work. The gene for brown eyes is dominant and the gene for blue eye is recessive. If one parent hands down a dominant brown eye gene while the other parent hands down a recessive blue eye gene, the dominant gene will win out and the child will have brown eyes. Gene-environment interactions. The environment a child is exposed to, both in utero and throughout the rest of his or her life, can also impact how genes are expressed. For example, exposure to harmful drugs while in utero can have a dramatic impact on later child development. Height is a good example of a genetic trait that can be influenced by environmental factors. While a child's genetic code may provide instructions for tallness, the expression of this height might be suppressed if the child has poor nutrition or chronic illness. Interaction of genes. When two genes contain conflicting information, one gene usually wins out over the other, which means the gene is expressed in the phenotype. Dominant as opposed to recessive genes typically end up expressed. For example, if one gene is dominant, such as the one that produces brown eyes, the diagram shows the combination of dominant and recessive genes received from the parents and their interaction and the ultimate projection of the gene in the offspring or the child, like the eye color or the hair color, etc. Genes and temperament. Most folks understand that genes strongly influence physical characteristics, but you may not know that genes also help determine people's temperament. Temperament refers to general pattern of emotional and behavioral responses that can be detected in infancy and sometimes continue into adulthood. These patterns appear to be strongly influenced by genetics. Altogether, factors may modify them. How do we know that genes influence temperament? Numerous studies have demonstrated that emotional and behavioral patterns show up early. They also show that even when identical twins are raised apart by different parents, they tend to have the same temperament style. Researchers have identified 3 temperaments in particular. Easy. Infants with this temperament style usually are in good moods, sleep regularly, eat normally, and adapt to new experiences readily. Parents find them easy to take care of. Difficult. These babies cry and fuss a lot. They don't have regular predictable sleep patterns. They are awakened more than other infants do, and they aren't easy to soothe when they are upset. Parents know when they have a baby with a difficult temperament because the infant is stressed and stressful to take care of. Slow to warm up. These babies are less active than easy or difficult babies, shy and withdrawn. They take a while to adjust to change but eventually adapt. Not all infants are easily categorized into easy, difficult and slow to warm up. Some may shift from one category to another from time to time. Others seem to have characteristics from more than one category. Genetic abnormalities. Genetic instructions are not infallible and can go off track at times. Sometimes, when a sperm or ovum is formed, the number of chromosomes may divide unevenly, causing the organism to have more or less than the normal 23 chromosomes. When one of these abnormal cells joins with the normal cell, the resulting zygote will have an uneven number of chromosomes. Researchers suggest that as many as half of all the zygotes that form have more than or less than 23 chromosomes, but most of these are spontaneously aborted and never develop into a full-term baby. In some cases, babies are born with an abnormal number of chromosomes. In every case, the result is some type of syndrome with a set of distinguishing characteristics. Sex chromosome abnormalities. The vast majority of newborns, both boys and girls, have at least one X chromosome. In some cases, about 1 in every 500 births, children are born with either a missing X chromosome or an additional sex chromosome. Klinefelter syndrome, Fragile X syndrome and Turner's syndromes are all examples of abnormalities involving the sex chromosomes. Klinefelter syndrome. Klinefelter syndrome XXY is caused by an extra X chromosome and is characterized by a lack of development of the secondary sex characteristics and as well as learning disabilities. Individuals with Klinefelter syndromes tend to have lower IQ than their siblings, tall structure, poor muscle tone, reduced secondary sexual characteristics, gynecomastia and small testes or infertility. Fragile X syndrome. Fragile X syndrome is caused when part of the X chromosome is attached to the other chromosome by such a thin string of molecules that it seems in danger of breaking off. It can affect both males and females. but the impact can vary. Some with fragile X show few if any signs, while others develop mild to severe intellectual disabilities. Common features of fragile X syndrome are prominent broad forehead, large ears, long face, strabismus, prominent jaw dental, crowding high arched palate, mitral valve prolapse, hollow chest, hypotonia, scoliosis, macroorchidism. Symptoms can include autism spectrum disorder, intellectual disability, distinct facial features. Turner's syndrome. Turner's syndrome occurs when only one sex chromosome, the X chromosome, is present. It affects only females and can result in short stature, a webbed neck, and a lack of secondary sex characteristics. Psychological impairments associated with Turner's syndrome include learning disability and difficulty recognizing emotions conveyed through facial expressions. The figure shows the physical characteristics of Turner's syndrome. Down syndrome. The most common type of chromosomal disorder is known as trisomy 21 or Down syndrome. In this case, the child has 3 chromosomes at the site of the 21st chromosome instead of the normal 2. Down syndrome is characterized by facial characteristics including a round face, slanted eyes, and a thick tongue. Individuals with Down syndrome may also face other physical problems including heart defects and hearing problems. Nearly all individuals with Down syndrome experience some type of intellectual impairment, but the exact severity can vary dramatically. The diagram shows some of the physiological characteristics of Down syndrome, such as dysmorphic round face, small ears, flat occiput, brush feed spots on iris, single palmar crease, incurved little fingers, gap between first and second toes, cardiac defects in 50% of the cases, respiratory infections, and increased risk of leukemia. In addition to the Down syndrome, there are many other genetic disorders with their own set of nuanced symptoms, neurological effects, physical characteristics, and potential learning hurdles, though rare in comparison to Down syndrome. Some of these other genetic disorders include Edwards syndrome, Peto syndrome, and Walkney syndrome, among others. Arguments in favor of heredity. Kinds of twins. There are 2 kinds of twins, identical and fraternal twins. Identical twins develop from one ovums. Fraternal twin arise from germination of 2 separate ova. Identical twins resemble each other and are always of same sex, while the fraternal twins mostly tends to be just brothers and sisters at the same time. Thorndike, Newman, Freeman, David Winfield, and many others have made studies on twins, and they come to the conclusion that heredity is an important factor in causing individual differences. Another study was concluded by David Winfield, and the following conclusions were made. The table shows the coefficient of correlation on intelligent quotient of the twins as follows: identical twins 0.90, fraternal twins 0.70, siblings 0.50, parents and children 0.31, unrelated children 0.30. These studies point out that the heredity is an important factor in the life of an individual. Identical twins reared apart since infancy differ somewhat more than identical twins reared together, but still they remain more alike than the fraternal twins, either reared apart or together. Fraternal twins are more alike in intelligence than ordinary siblings. It means that closer the relationship, the higher is the correlation of scores on intelligence. To summarize this module, at the moment of conception, biological forces begin that strongly influence what a person becomes. A child's genetic blueprint starts with a single cell that reproduces miraculously into the trillions of cells that make up a human being. In this section, we highlighted the basic biology, sometimes referred to as nature, that explains the process of becoming human.